Have you ever felt that the more deeply you think, the harder it becomes to feel understood? It's as if every time you look beneath the surface of life, the distance between you and the world quietly grows wider. People nod politely when you speak, but their eyes wander, not out of disrespect, but because your thoughts touch places they rather not visit. This isn't just your imagination. History has shown us that the act of thinking too deeply often comes with a price: isolation. Those who dare to question, to peel back the comfortable illusions that most people live within, are often met not with admiration, but with resistance. Thinkers throughout time have faced this wall, misunderstood, mocked, or silenced, not because they lacked wisdom, but because their honesty made others uneasy. Truth, after all, is not always beautiful. Sometimes it burns before it enlightens. One man who lived this paradox fully was Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher who refused to dress his ideas in comforting lies. He spoke about life with raw clarity, exposing its pain and absurdity. And for that, he was both feared and ignored during his time. But maybe that's the destiny of deep thinkers, to see the world not as it appears, but as it truly is, and to carry the loneliness that comes with that vision. And perhaps the real question isn't why society fears intelligence, but why truth feels so uncomfortable for most of us. Maybe it's because once you see too clearly, you can never go back to pretending again. People often say that intelligence is a curse, that those who see too much, understand too deeply, are destined to walk through life alone. But what really lies beneath this idea? Why does society instinctively distance itself from those who think differently? The answer isn't just social, it's psychological. Human beings, by nature, are uncomfortable with anything that challenges their sense of security. We admire strength because it protects us. We envy wealth, but it doesn't question who we are. Yet when we meet someone whose mind shines brighter than ours, something inside us begins to tremble. Their intelligence doesn't harm us, but it exposes what we've ignored: our own laziness and thought, our own fear of being small. That's why brilliance often feels threatening, not because it attacks us, but because it holds up a mirror we're afraid to look into. And so instead of admiration, what rises is resistance. Instead of learning from them, we turn away. Maybe the tragedy isn't that intelligent people are lonely, but that so few of us are willing to meet them halfway, to step out of comfort and into truth. Psychologists call it the mirror effect. It's a strange thing. When a deeply reflective person enters a room, they don't just share new ideas. They quietly reflect back what others try not to see. Their presence alone becomes a mirror, showing people their own limits, their own fears, and that reflection can be hard to forgive. Even when they say nothing, their very way of being reminds others of how little they question themselves. It's not arrogance, it's simply the discomfort of facing truth. And that discomfort runs deeper with intelligence than with any other form of superiority. We can admire someone stronger than us. We can even envy those with more money, but we rarely resent them the way we resent someone who's more aware. Why? Because physical strength and wealth don't challenge our identity, but intelligence does. It questions the ground we stand on. And the moment that happens, we feel exposed. Maybe that's why wisdom often feels like a crime in the eyes of the ordinary, not because it hurts others, but because it reminds them of what they refuse to face within themselves. In most societies, we associate leadership with power, the kind that can be seen. A strong body inspires trust. A wealthy person commands respect. Beauty, too, has its own quiet authority. These qualities are visible, they catch the eye, and because they're easy to recognize, they rarely threaten us. We may envy them, but envy is still a form of admiration. Intelligence, however, works differently. It doesn't reveal itself through appearances or possessions. It lives inside the mind, the very space where each of us builds our identity. That's why it feels personal. When someone's thoughts cut deeper than ours, it doesn't just challenge what we know, it challenges who we are. And yet, paradoxically, the intelligent are often seen as leaders too, not because of their power or their wealth, but because their insight can guide others through uncertainty. They see what most cannot, and in their clarity, others sometimes find safety until that clarity begins to shine too bright. Whenever someone dares to question what most people take for granted, the reaction they face is rarely logical. It's emotional. Challenging the status quo doesn't just threaten society's beliefs, it shakes the foundation of how individuals see themselves. To most people, ideas aren't just ideas, they're extensions of their identity. So when a deep thinker comes along and pulls at those threads, it feels less like a discussion and more like an attack. That's why resistance often rises, quietly but fiercely, not from arrogance, not even from pride, but from fear, the fear of having to confront one's own limitations. Throughout history, that fear has isolated thinkers who saw too clearly. Their insights didn't just question systems or traditions, they exposed the fragile walls people build to protect their sense of self. And when those walls begin to crack, most would rather silence the truth than face the reflection it shows. It's not cruelty, it's human nature. Our first instinct has always been to protect the ego, even when it means turning away from the light that could free us. Take a moment, think back to your own life. Have you ever tried to share a deep thought in a casual conversation, and suddenly the room went quiet? People glance away. Someone changes the topic, and you're left wondering, did I say something wrong? But you didn't. What you experienced wasn't rejection. It was a reflex. Most people are comfortable living on the surface. They talk about the weather, the news, daily life, but the moment a conversation drifts into deeper waters, something inside them resists. It's not that they don't understand. It's that depth demands reflection, and reflection often brings discomfort. So they turn away, not because they dislike you, but because your words hold up a mirror to thoughts they've been avoiding. This quiet resistance isn't rare. It's almost universal. Even among thinkers, even among scholars, the instinct to defend one's comfort zone is stronger than the curiosity to explore what lies beyond it. Visionaries are often not alone because they want to be, but because the world quietly pushes them to the edges. It's ironic, isn't it? Society praises intelligence in words, yet rewards confidence in action. People are drawn to certainty, to the voice that sounds sure, even when the message is shallow. Meanwhile, those who speak with depth, with thought, with caution, are often dismissed as too complicated. That's why throughout history, it wasn't always the wisest who led the crowd, but the most convincing. Populist leaders, motivational speakers, viral influencers. Many of them thrive not by revealing truth, but by giving people the feeling of clarity, because comfort sells better than complexity. And that is the silent tragedy of intelligence. The deeper your thoughts go, the smaller your audience becomes. In today's world, it's easier to give people what they want to hear than what they need to think about. That's why true thinkers rarely go viral, because truth doesn't always feel good. Those who dare to question the obvious, who peel away the comfortable lies society tells itself, often find themselves speaking into silence. This is what philosophers call the paradox of intelligence. The more you chase truth, the further you drift from the crowd. It's a strange irony. The mirror that reflects society's flaws also explains why society refuses to change. Because when people look into that mirror, they don't see wisdom. They see everything they've been avoiding. But that leads to a deeper question. If intelligence truly unsettles people, is there proof that humans actually fear it? Can science explain this quiet tension between truth and comfort? Modern science actually confirms what philosophers have long suspected. When a person feels intellectually outmatched, their brain reacts as if they're in danger. The amygdala, that tiny part of the brain that detects threats, lights up, triggering the same response we'd feel if we were facing a physical threat. In other words, deep ideas can make the brain panic. It's not just discomfort, it's survival instinct. But why would a simple conversation or a complex idea set off the same alarm system as a wild animal? To understand that, we have to look back, far back, into the story of how our brains evolved. For most of human history, our survival didn't depend on intelligence or philosophy. It depended on belonging, on fitting into the tribe, on moving with the group. Thinking differently once meant standing alone. And standing alone meant danger long before cities, screens, and schools. Humans survived in tribes. Back then, harmony wasn't just pleasant, it was protection. To be accepted meant safety. To be rejected meant danger. Alone, a person could not hunt, eat, or defend themselves. That's why our brains evolved to crave belonging even more than truth. And that instinct never left us. When a highly intelligent person walks into a room, they don't intend to threaten anyone, but their very presence, their way of questioning, observing, and thinking can quietly disturb the tribal balance. New ideas challenge the old hierarchy. Different thoughts test the group's comfort. And so, on a subconscious level, the brain reacts, not as if it met a thinker, but as if it met a threat. This sense of isolation that deep thinkers feel isn't because they lack social skills. It's because their way of seeing the world doesn't quite fit inside the mold society has built. In a world that rewards conformity, clarity often feels like rebellion. Their ideas stand out, and so do they. But here's where it gets fascinating. A 2021 study from Stanford uncovered something remarkable. This intellectual threat depends on the situation. When people interact one-on-one with someone highly intelligent, the sense of threat almost disappears. Curiosity replaces discomfort. The mind feels safe to explore. Yet, when the same thinker speaks within a group, everything changes. The collective brain reacts differently. Suddenly, status matters more than truth. Ideas become competition. And intelligence, instead of inspiring, starts to feel like a challenge to the hierarchy. That's why the group, not the individual, is often where the fear of intelligence truly lives. When it comes to intelligence, what truly matters isn't just how smart you are, but how others perceive your intelligence. In social settings, perception often outweighs reality. When someone feels outmatched intellectually, they may not admit it even to themselves. Instead, a subtle defense takes over. They dismiss, they mock, or they quietly exclude. It's not always malice. Sometimes it's fear, disguised as pride. Psychologists call this the Dunning-Kruger effect, a bias where those with limited understanding tend to overestimate their abilities, while the truly knowledgeable often doubt themselves. In simple terms, the less we know, the more certain we feel. This bias plays out everywhere. In debates, in workplaces, even in friendships. It twists the social fabric, making genuine intelligence seem arrogant and overconfidence appear wise. For deep thinkers, this becomes a silent struggle, not against ignorance, but against the illusion of certainty that surrounds them. It's a strange paradox. Those who know the least often sound the most certain, while those who truly understand deeply tend to question themselves. This imbalance shapes how people connect. When overconfidence meets genuine insight, tension quietly fills the room. The less informed may dismiss the wiser voice, not out of logic, but out of loyalty to their own comfort. It's easier to protect the illusion of knowledge than to admit we might be wrong. This is why society often clings to the status quo. Change feels dangerous, not because it hurts the world, but because it shakes the self. And when truth challenges deeply rooted beliefs, another phenomenon appears: the backfire effect. Instead of reconsidering, people defend their ideas even harder. They don't let new knowledge in. They build walls to keep it out. So the wiser a person becomes, the lonelier truth starts to feel, not because truth is cruel, but because most minds would rather be comfortable than correct. In today's digital world, intelligence is no longer a quiet virtue. It's often treated as a disturbance. When someone dares to share an idea that doesn't fit the popular narrative, the reaction is rarely curiosity. It's resistance. Social media has magnified this. Its algorithms don't reward truth or reason. They reward reaction. The louder, the angrier, the simpler, the more it spreads. Thoughtful conversations vanish, replaced by short, catchy fragments, designed not to enlighten, but to provoke. The internet has become an echo chamber where emotion travels faster than understanding. And for those who think deeply, those who seek meaning beyond the noise. This environment feels suffocating because reason whispers, but outrage screams. So the voices of the reflective get lost in the crowd, not because they're wrong, but because they're quiet. We live in an age where complexity must bow to convenience. Ideas are no longer valued for their depth, but for their shareability. The faster something spreads, the more it's believed to matter. And so wisdom gets compressed, distilled into short clips, quotes without context, truths without thought. Entertainment has replaced enlightenment. The stage belongs not to the thinker, but to whoever can keep attention for 10 seconds longer. For those who seek depth, this world feels like a surface that never ends. Every attempt to bring meaning is filtered, reshaped, and served back as content. Something to scroll past, not something to sit with. But this rejection of intelligence, it isn't simply cultural. It runs deeper, biological, psychological, woven into what it means to be human. Our ancestors survived, not by questioning, but by belonging. And even now, the need for acceptance outweighs the hunger for truth. Technology hasn't changed that. It's only amplified it. The algorithms don't create this behavior. They just mirror it. So perhaps the real question is not why society fears intelligence, but whether we've built a world that still knows how to listen to it. Before one can resist the tide, one must first understand the current that pulls against them. If intelligence faces resistance, then what exactly does society protect? The answer, it seems, lies not in truth, but in comfort. A world where predictability is safety, and questioning that comfort feels like betrayal. Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher both revered and misunderstood, once said that intelligence is not a blessing, but a burden. He believed that the sharper the mind, the more one sees the cracks beneath the surface of things. And with that clarity comes a kind of loneliness, the distance between what is seen and what others wish to see. While many thinkers of his time saw intelligence as the path to progress, Schopenhauer saw it as the curse of awareness. For the more one understands, the harder it becomes to belong. It's not merely that society rejects the intelligent. It's that truth itself often disrupts the illusion people depend on to feel safe. Intelligence, in Schopenhauer's eyes, is not a privilege. It's a weight one must learn to carry. At the heart of his philosophy lies the idea of the will, a blind, restless energy that drives every living being. It is not guided by reason or morality, but by a primal urge to survive, to seek comfort, to continue existing. Most people, Schopenhauer believed, live under the rule of this will. They chase pleasure, avoid pain, cling to whatever promises security. Their actions are instinctive, driven not by thought, but by desire. But the truly intelligent live differently. They are not content with surface pleasures. They hunger for understanding, even if that truth shatters their peace of mind, while the masses pursue comfort. The thinker pursues clarity, and clarity by its nature is cruel because it strips away illusion. It's here that Schopenhauer draws the line between the ordinary and the aware. The more you see, the harder it becomes to live like everyone else. Most people spend their lives avoiding painful truths. It's easier that way to stay distracted, entertained, surrounded by noise. But those with deeper minds cannot look away. They are drawn almost against their will toward truth, even when that truth isolates them, even when it costs them peace. This pursuit creates a silent rift between the thinker and the world. While many find joy in relationships, comfort, familiar routines, the intellectual often feels out of place, as though watching life unfold through glass. Schopenhauer believed that the more one understands human nature, the harder it becomes to connect with it. When you see through people's motives, their masks, their contradictions, you lose the ability to engage with them naively. And so wisdom becomes a kind of exile. You see too much to belong and too clearly, to pretend. Deception, whether we admit it or not, is woven into the fabric of human connection. From small talk to polite lies, society thrives on the gentle art of pretending. Status, image, reputation, these are the currencies of interaction. But those who value truth over appearance often find themselves out of rhythm with the world. Their need for sincerity clashes with a culture that rewards comfort over honesty. Where others find ease in shallow conversation, the thinker feels emptiness, a quiet boredom beneath the noise. It's not arrogance. It's simply that once you've tasted depth, surface level exchanges lose their flavor. Schopenhauer saw this as a symptom of something far greater, the illusion of human desire. He believed that ambition, status, and even happiness are mirages, temporary distractions, meant to keep us moving, to keep us wanting. And perhaps that's why those who see through illusion often struggle to play the game. Because once you recognize the stage, you can no longer pretend to enjoy the performance. Most people chase the same three things: money, power, and love. These pursuits shape nearly every story, every decision, every dream. But those who think deeply often question why. Why do we chase what always slips away? Why do we crave recognition from a world that forgets so easily? This quiet questioning sets them apart. To others, it can seem like coldness, a lack of passion, or ambition. But in truth, it's not indifference. It's awareness. a deeper understanding of how fleeting these desires really are. Because when someone sees beyond the illusion, their presence becomes unsettling. It forces others to face truths. They've spent their lives avoiding. Schopenhauer described intelligence as a painful gift, a kind of spiritual nearsightedness where one sees too clearly to be at ease. He wrote that the wiser a person becomes, the lonelier their path tends to grow. The greater a person's intellect, the more likely they are to drift away from the crowd, not because they dislike people, but because they see too clearly. Deep thinkers spend much of their lives observing, analyzing, connecting threads that others overlook. And in doing so, they often notice the cracks in society, the hypocrisy, the repetition, the noise disguised as meaning. This awareness becomes a double-edged sword. It sharpens perception, but dulls contentment. Schopenhauer believed that intelligence and happiness rarely coexist. The more one understands, the harder it becomes to be at peace. For ignorance, he wrote, is the true foundation of contentment, a kind of blessed blindness that shields the heart from despair. History, too, seems to echo this truth. Many of the world's greatest minds, poets, artists, philosophers, have wrestled with loneliness, melancholy, and the weight of existence. It's as if the price of seeing the world deeply is losing the comfort of belonging to it. Schopenhauer's philosophy was not merely a diagnosis of suffering. It was also a map toward peace. He understood that great intelligence could isolate, but he also believed that solitude need not be a prison. To him, being alone was not a curse. It was a canvas, a sacred space where the mind could unfold freely, unshackled by the noise and expectations of the crowd. He urged thinkers not to waste their solitude chasing validation, but to use it as fertile ground for creativity and growth. In isolation, one could read, write, reflect, not to escape the world, but to understand it more deeply, rather than forcing themselves to blend in. Schopenhauer advised the wise to seek the company of kindred spirits, those rare individuals who value truth over comfort and depth over distraction. Because the goal is not to reject society, but to find one's rightful place within it. A place where silence becomes strength and solitude turns into clarity. Schopenhauer believed that those who think deeply should seek refuge among minds of the same depth, not necessarily in crowded halls or busy gatherings, but in the quiet companionship of great books, in letters, in ideas that transcend time. He advised thinkers to engage with the world carefully, to choose when to speak and when to remain silent, because Not every truth deserves to be spoken in every room, and not every ear is ready to listen. The wise, he said, must learn to observe society, the way an artist studies a landscape, with patience, with distance, and with a quiet understanding that not every detail needs correction. His message to the misunderstood minds of today is simple, yet timeless. You are not broken. You are simply tuned to a different frequency. The same awareness that isolates you is also what grants you independence, clarity, and peace. Solitude, when embraced with purpose, becomes power. And the more deeply one understands life, the less one needs the world's approval to feel whole. In Schopenhauer's view, intelligence is a double-edged sword. It sharpens our vision, allowing us to see life with rare clarity. But that same clarity can wound us. It grants the gift of perception, yet also the burden of seeing through illusions that others depend on. Society does not truly fear intelligence. It fears what intelligence reveals, the fragile truths beneath our daily routines, the quiet emptiness hiding behind noise and comfort. Those who think deeply are not rejected because they are wrong. They are rejected because they see too clearly, because they reach uncomfortable truths too quickly. If you've ever felt alone in your thoughts, know that it is not madness nor weakness. It is the quiet price of awareness, the sign that your mind walks a path most people never dare to see. So do not curse your depth. Cherish it, because in the end, it is through understanding, not ignorance, that the soul finds its truest freedom. Most people see the world only as it appears, not as it truly is. But reality, the kind that cuts beneath the surface, demands more than open eyes. It demands courage, the courage to look, even when what we find is unsettling. And that's where the question arises. Are deep thinkers destined to walk this path alone? Or can one remain thoughtful, yet still belong to a world that rarely understands depth? The truth is, society was not built for minds that question. Its foundations depend on predictability, on keeping people comfortable, calm, and obedient, from schools to workplaces, from conversations at dinner to the content we scroll through each day. Everything nudges us toward sameness. To think differently is to disturb the balance that keeps everyone else at ease. People chase what feels familiar, not what feels true. That's why small talk thrives where silence should live. Why simple slogans spread faster than honest complexity. And why minds that seek meaning often find themselves surrounded by noise. It's not that society hates wisdom. It fears the mirror it holds up. Because truth doesn't flatter. It strips away illusion. forcing us to see how fragile our comfort really is. So the real question isn't why people avoid truth, but what they're afraid will happen once they face it. Have you ever noticed how silence fills the room? When someone says something too real, that moment of discomfort, that pause, isn't emptiness. It's the sound of truth brushing against denial. From the moment we begin to think, we're taught not always by words, but by the world itself. That comfort is safer than curiosity. Our minds are wired for stability. They crave the familiar, the predictable, the certain. Science calls this cognitive ease, a subtle bias that makes the brain lean toward what feels effortless to process. It's a survival mechanism from an ancient time when confusion could mean danger and clarity meant safety. So when we encounter an idea that feels complex, our brain doesn't see it as interesting. It sees it as risky. It whispers, "This might hurt. This might change too much." And just like that, we retreat. Not because we lack intelligence, but because we've been trained to protect our comfort more than our growth. This is why we scroll past long essays, to watch short clips, why slogans spread faster than substance, and why true thinkers often find themselves speaking to an empty room. But here's the paradox. Every leap of progress, every invention, every moral awakening, every truth that reshaped humanity was born from the very discomfort our brains try to avoid. Maybe the real question isn't why we fear difficult ideas, but what could happen if we stopped running from them. There's a strange irony in how the human mind works. Even when the world around us is clearly flawed, most people still defend it. We tell ourselves that things are just the way they are, not because we believe it's right, but because change feels terrifying. Psychologists call this system justification theory, our deep-rooted need to protect the system we live in. Even if that system quietly limits us, it's easier to believe the world is fair than to accept that it might not be. Because the moment we question it, we step into uncertainty. And uncertainty is something the human mind instinctively resists. Then there's groupthink, the silent agreement that keeps societies running smoothly and keeps real progress at bay. It's that invisible pressure to nod along, to stay in harmony with the crowd, even when something inside us whispers that the crowd is wrong. We see it in offices where no one questions the boss, in classrooms where silence replaces curiosity, and on social media where disagreement is treated like rebellion. Most people don't reject truth because they hate it. They reject it because truth often demands standing alone. And standing alone in any society feels like exile. But maybe, just maybe, the first step toward real wisdom is learning to be okay with that silence that follows when you finally speak your mind. Have you ever wondered why so many people defend a broken system, even when it quietly works against them? It's not ignorance. It's something much deeper, something wired into our psychology. Psychologists call it system justification theory, the mind's way of preserving stability at all cost. Instead of questioning authority or challenging outdated beliefs, most people convince themselves that this is just how things are. It's easier to believe that the system is fair than to face the anxiety that comes with real change. Because change by nature threatens the comfort our minds cling to. But this isn't just about individuals, it's about groups. When people come together, another force takes over. Groupthink. It's that subtle pressure to agree, to stay silent when the majority nods, to protect belonging, even at the cost of truth. In such moments, disagreement feels dangerous. Not because the idea is wrong, but because standing apart feels like rejection. So people conform. They repeat the same ideas, defend the same institutions, and mock those who dare to question them. It's not that they hate the thinkers. They fear what those thinkers awaken inside them, doubt. And that fear is powerful. It's why philosophers are often misunderstood, why truth tellers are dismissed as difficult, and why so few dare to think beyond what's already accepted. Maybe that's the tragedy of our time. Not that people can't see the truth, but that deep down, they don't want to. We often imagine echo chambers as something born from the internet, but in truth, they've existed long before the age of screens. Even within the realm of intellectual debate, people tend to surround themselves with voices that echo their own. They listen not to understand, but to confirm what they already believe. And the more they hear it, the more real it feels. This cycle quietly builds invisible walls, walls that keep out anything that challenges comfort. When someone dares to think differently, to ask questions that pierce through those walls, they often pay a price. They are misread, mocked, sometimes even attacked, not for being wrong, but simply for being different. Yet this rejection of deep thought didn't start online. It started much earlier, in the places where our minds were first shaped. Schools, offices, institutions. Our education system teaches us to be intelligent, but not always. To be wise, it rewards obedience over curiosity, accuracy over insight, and memorization over reflection. From the very beginning, we are trained not to question, but to repeat, and maybe that's where the real echo chamber begins. Not in our phones, but in our classrooms. From an early age, we are taught that success means following instructions, not questioning them. Students who excel at memorizing facts are praised as smart, while those who dare to think beyond the textbook are often labeled as distracted, or worse, defiant. But this pattern doesn't end when school does. In the professional world, it simply changes costume. The workplace rewards agreement more than insight. People who challenge norms, who ask uncomfortable questions, are quietly branded as difficult, uncooperative, or hard to manage. And so many learn to stay silent, not because they lack ideas, but because they fear the cost of expression. Modern offices celebrate the ones who fit in, not necessarily the ones who think clearly. Career advancement often depends less on brilliance and more on the ability to maintain harmony, to nod at the right moments, to keep the illusion of consensus intact. Perhaps that's why history's most profound thinkers rarely sat at the center of power. They weren't celebrated. They were tolerated. They didn't build comfort. They built clarity. And clarity, by its nature, threatens comfort. So maybe the question isn't why society resists deep thinkers, but why so many deep thinkers still choose to care about society at all. Across the ages, the story repeats itself. The thinker, the dreamer, the visionary, all walking a path that society first mocks before it later glorifies. During their lifetimes, They are treated as heretics, madmen, misfits. Their ideas too radical for comfort become threats to the order of things. We love to say that we value intelligence, that we reward innovation. But the truth is, society doesn't celebrate the birth of a new idea. It celebrates its domestication. Only when the danger of originality has faded, only when the once revolutionary thought becomes safe, do we start to honor the very minds we once silenced. Galileo gazed at the stars and saw truth, yet he was forced to deny what he discovered, not because he was wrong, but because he was too early. Van Gogh painted with colors no one understood. He died poor and alone. Today, his art sells for more than the wealth he ever dreamed of. And Nikola Tesla, the man who lit up the world, died in darkness, forgotten by the very civilization his mind helped illuminate. It makes you wonder, do we truly value brilliance? Or do we simply wait until the fire of genius cools down enough to be admired without being burned? Throughout history, society has always had a complicated relationship with intellectual curiosity, a fascination on the surface, and a quiet hostility underneath. When a new idea dares to disturb the familiar order, the first instinct of the collective is not admiration, but resistance. Rather than embracing the thinker who expands the limits of understanding, people treat such figures as threats, anomalies to be contained, silenced, or ignored, until time renders their ideas safe. Even after the flames of controversy fade, the memory of that resistance lingers. We remember the geniuses, but we forget the loneliness, the accusations, the isolation they endured while still alive. Every age seems to recognize brilliance, only when it no longer has the power to disrupt. History provides countless witnesses to this paradox. Socrates condemned for corrupting the youth, not because he lied, but because he asked questions that truth demanded. Galileo forced to kneel before ignorance, retracting the stars he had already proven to move. Hypatia, the philosopher of Alexandria, torn apart by those who could not bear her intellect. And centuries later, countless thinkers, writers, scientists, dismissed, exiled, forgotten. Their only crime was the courage to think differently. Perhaps the cruelest irony is that progress itself is built upon the bones of those once deemed dangerous. It makes one wonder if the present generation fears the thinkers of today. What will the future say about us? All these remarkable figures shared one tragic trait. They were born before their time. Their vision reached further than the world around them was willing to see. And for that, they paid the price. Take Socrates, for instance, the man often hailed as the father of Western philosophy. He did not seek followers, nor did he claim divine wisdom. Instead, he stood in the open streets of Athens, questioning merchants, soldiers, politicians alike. His weapon was not power, but curiosity. He asked the kind of questions that dismantled certainty. What is justice? What is virtue? How do you know what you believe? And yet, instead of gratitude, his city responded with fear. To the rulers of his time, Socrates was not a philosopher. He was a threat. They accused him of corrupting the youth, of mocking the gods, of unraveling the very order that held Athens together. But his true crime was far more dangerous. He taught people to think for themselves. When the moment came, he was offered an escape, a chance to flee the fate that awaited him. But he refused. For Socrates, to abandon truth in order to live would be worse than death itself. And so, he drank the poison calmly, leaving behind not a legacy of rebellion, but of integrity, a final lesson in courage that echoed through centuries. Sometimes, the world punishes those who hold up the mirror too clearly. It makes one wonder in our own age. How many thinkers have we silenced? Not with poison, but with ridicule, neglect, or indifference. Socrates' choice to embrace death rather than betray his beliefs remains one of the most powerful acts of intellectual courage in human history. His final words, "An unexamined life is not worth living," were not simply philosophy, but a declaration that integrity has a price, and that truth is worth dying for. Through him, the world learned that wisdom does not live in comfort, but in confrontation, the courage to face what most would rather ignore. Centuries later, Galileo Galilei would walk a similar path. His telescope unveiled a universe that refused to revolve around human vanity. The earth, he discovered, was not the center of creation, and for that, he was branded a heretic. The church, which at the time held dominion over knowledge itself, could not allow one man's lens to shatter the illusion it had built. Under the threat of torture, Galileo was forced to recant the very truths his eyes had witnessed. And yet, history remembers the man, not his submission. He spent his final years under house arrest, whispering words that would echo through time, and yet it moves. A quiet rebellion, the kind that needs no sword, only conviction. Today, we live in an age that claims to celebrate reason and freedom of thought. But perhaps the question remains, have we truly evolved beyond the fear that silenced Galileo? Or have we simply found new, subtler ways to punish those who see the world differently? Galileo Galilei, a name that still glimmers like a distant star in the night sky of human history. He was not merely a scientist. He was a man who dared to look beyond what others were told to see. Yet, the same lens that revealed the vastness of the universe also became the reason for his imprisonment. For challenging the authority of his time, Galileo spent his final years confined to his home. His books banned, his voice silenced for nearly a century. But silence cannot bury truth. Through that isolation, his ideas continued to breathe, whispered from one generation to the next, proof that genuine insight cannot be destroyed by decree. Galileo believed that real strength did not come from obeying inherited dogmas, but from the courage to question them. He once implied that morality, as society defined it, was often built upon convenient illusions, stories told to maintain order, not to seek truth. In that sense, Galileo was not just observing the heavens, he was holding up a mirror to humanity itself. For his contemporaries, this was unbearable. His discoveries shattered the comforting lies that made people feel secure, that Earth was the center, that man was special, that everything revolved around us. And perhaps that is why society resisted him. Not because his science was wrong, but because it made people confront how small and how fragile their beliefs truly were. So maybe the question we should ask is this: do we really fear the unknown? Or do we simply fear losing the illusions that make us feel safe? Nikola Tesla, a name often whispered with awe, yet shadowed by misunderstanding. While history remembers him as the eccentric inventor who played with lightning, few recognize the depth of his mind, a thinker whose ideas touched not only science, but also the realms of philosophy and human existence itself. Tesla dreamed of a world illuminated by free energy, where knowledge and power flowed through the air like light. But such visions frightened those who profited from control. To them, Tesla's genius was not a gift, it was a threat. His inventions, his theories, even his belief that technology should serve humanity rather than enslave it, all stood against the greed of his age. Society called him mad. Yet, what is madness, if not the courage to see beyond the limits of the ordinary mind? History has shown that the world often mocks what it cannot yet comprehend. Just as Galileo was silenced for revealing the truth about the cosmos, Tesla was ostracized for revealing the truth about human potential. And perhaps that's the cruel irony of genius. The brighter the light, the deeper the shadow it casts. Those who think beyond their time are often exiled by it. But when the dust of misunderstanding settles, the world finally realizes that the madman was merely the future, arriving too soon. So ask yourself, how many Teslas walk among us today, dismissed not because they are wrong, but because their light is too blinding for our comfort, while men like Thomas Edison and J.P. Morgan built empires of wealth? Nikola Tesla was left in the shadows of his own genius. His dream of free energy, power shared by all, not sold to the few, threatened the very foundations of profit. And so the world turned its back on him. They called him impractical, unrealistic. But what they truly feared was not his madness. It was his vision. Tesla died alone in a dim hotel room, surrounded not by luxury, but by notebooks filled with ideas the world wasn't ready to understand. Meanwhile, others grew rich from his inventions, selling light, while the man who gave it to them faded into darkness. His story reminds us of a cruel pattern that repeats throughout history. Society celebrates the salesman, not the thinker, the one who sells the dream, not the one who dares to create it. And then there was Alan Turing, another brilliant mind swallowed by misunderstanding. During the chaos of World War II, it was Turing's mind that cracked the code of the Axis powers, turning the tide of history and saving millions of lives. His ideas gave birth to what we now call artificial intelligence, the very mind of the modern world. Yet, what did society give him in return? Condemnation, isolation. Like Tesla, Turing was punished not for his mistakes, but for being ahead of his time. They both remind us of an uncomfortable truth. That progress is often built upon the loneliness of those who see too far. The world needs visionaries, but it rarely knows how to love them. Despite his brilliance, Alan Turing was never truly accepted by the world he helped to save. In 1952, he was condemned not for treason, not for betrayal, but for simply being himself. His punishment? Chemical castration, a sentence so cruel, it stripped away his dignity, his spirit, and eventually his life. At just 41, the man who gave humanity the blueprint for artificial intelligence took his own life. Today, the world calls him a hero. Statues bear his name. Awards honor his legacy. And history now speaks his truth. But in his time, society turned its back. They loved what he created, but never who he was. And yet, this pattern of rejection is not limited to men alone. Long before Turing's tragedy, there was Hypatia of Alexandria, a woman who stood against the tide of a world ruled by men. In an age when women were silenced, she dared to teach. She was a philosopher, a mathematician, and an astronomer, a guiding light in the intellectual world of ancient Rome. Her classroom became a place where reason triumphed, over superstition, where truth was pursued not through faith, but through logic. But, like all who challenge power, Hypatia's light grew too bright for her world to bear. Her courage to question the beliefs of her time made her a threat, and threats, in every era, are silenced. Her devotion to truth became her undoing. In the year 415 CE, Hypatia's commitment to reason and science placed her in direct conflict with the rising tides of fanaticism. Her lectures, her logic, her calm defiance, all were seen as acts of rebellion against the religious powers of her time. When knowledge threatens authority, violence often follows. And so it was that Hypatia, the greatest mind of Alexandria, was dragged through the streets by a mob of zealots, her body destroyed, but her legacy immortal. Her death was not just the loss of a woman, it was the silencing of reason itself. This tragic moment echoes a timeless truth. Every age fears the minds that think beyond its limits. From Socrates to Galileo, from Tesla to Turing, and from Hypatia to countless others whose names history forgot. The pattern repeats. Those who dare to see the world as it truly is are often condemned by those who fear the light. And yet, time always redeems them. The same ideas once called dangerous become the foundations of progress. The same voices, once silenced, become the echoes that guide the generations to come. Because truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back to the surface. Humanity has never truly feared intelligence. It fears what intelligence reveals, because insight demands change, and change disrupts comfort. This raises a timeless question. If history teaches us that deep thinkers are often met with resistance, then what is the path forward for those who see more deeply than others? Are they condemned to a life of isolation? Not necessarily. The art lies in learning how to exist within society without being consumed by it. Not every environment is fertile ground for truth. Not every conversation deserves your depth. Share your most profound thoughts with those capable of receiving them. You do not need to be understood by the crowd, only by the few who listen beyond words. Because wisdom does not shout in the marketplace. It speaks quietly to those who have learned to hear. It becomes essential at some point for every deep thinker to find their tribe, those rare souls who share a similar hunger for meaning. Sometimes they are found through books, sometimes in quiet corners of online communities, or within small circles where conversation still has weight. History's greatest minds all shared one subtle strength: the ability to translate complexity into clarity. Einstein once said, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." True depth is not about sounding profound. It's about making truth feel real to others. Schopenhauer drew an even finer distinction. He wrote that talent hits a target no one else can reach, but genius hits a target no one else can even see. That vision, the ability to perceive what lies beneath illusion, often makes the world uncomfortable. Because seeing too much, too clearly, means you can no longer pretend. But this clarity is not a curse. It's a responsibility to speak truth gently, to bring light where others see only shadow, without expecting everyone to understand. At some point, you must stop fighting your own depth. The world needs deep thinkers, even if it doesn't always recognize them. It is thinkers like you who carry the quiet fire that moves humanity forward. If you've ever felt like an outsider because your thoughts run deeper than the room around you, remember this: you are not alone. Every mind that has ever changed the world once felt misunderstood by it. So, if these reflections spoke to something within you, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Have you ever felt rejected for thinking too deeply? Let's open a conversation, not about fitting in, but about understanding what it truly means to see the world differently. And if you wish to keep exploring the wisdom of history's most brilliant minds, consider subscribing. It takes just a moment, but it's one more step toward building a space where deep thinkers are finally understood